The antiseptic system of surgery introduced by Lord Lister was based on the theory that certain microorganisms caused inflammation and pus in wounds, and to prevent it they had to be destroyed, hence the invention of the carbolic spray, which in the late 1800s often killed the patient. It was eventually discovered that it was impossible to kill the millions of microbes which gain access to a wound, even during the briefest operation. On September 16, 1896, Lord Lister confessed at Liverpool that his whole theory was erroneous, and that it was only the grosser forms of septic mischief which had to be reckoned with in surgery. The carbolic spray and even the antiseptic washing and irrigation had been abandoned by him 6 years earlier. He regretted introducing the carbolic spray, saying, "I feel ashamed that I should ever have recommended it for the purpose of destroying the microbes in the air." Antiseptic surgery was then replaced by aseptic, which simply signifies careful and wholesome cleanliness. The germs were left alone, and attention turned to the cleanliness of the patient, doctors, nurses, and dressings. But unfortunately, by this time powerful vested interests and financial forces worked together to prop up the decaying germ theory. The belief in special microorganisms as the cause of specific diseases had to be maintained. Pasteur had invented serum therapy, and lots of money was being invested for the manufacture of these fraudulent cures. The American Medical Association, founded in 1847 and incorporated in 1897, began to claim ownership over those who were selling medicines and those who were considered healers. It was done under the guise of getting rid of the conmen and improving medical education. In reality, it was a power grab by the biggest conman of them all, John D. Rockefeller, the Standard Oil tycoon. The consolidation of medical practices in America was also pushed by Andrew Carnegie, who helped build the American steel industry. In the early 1900s, Carnegie hired Abraham Flexner, brother of the director of the Rockefeller Institute, Simon Flexner, to tour over 155 medical schools around the country. This resulted in the Flexner Report, published in 1910, that recommended the closing of more than half of these schools. Flexner's report did have some valid points, but unfortunately, the motives for the report were driven by Rockefeller's desire to control the medical system. His report called for all schools to adopt and teach the new medical system that was built upon the germ theory and the emergence of petrochemical medicines as a form of treatment. Also, the report recommended that all schools must undergo continuous periodic reviews in order to receive funding and have their accreditation renewed by the AMA. Congress acted upon Flexner's recommendations and changed laws related to medical practices. Any schools that did not play ball were forced to close, and doctors who spoke out against it or used natural treatments were arrested and jailed. If Jesus Christ was going around healing people today, they would be after arresting him for healing without a license. Rockefeller made sure to secure his monopoly by launching a targeted smear campaign against his competitors, discrediting and demonizing them through the newspapers and other media of the time. The use of natural healing over the petrochemical drugs was now considered quackery. The cut, burn and poison of allopathic medicine became the standard model. Flexner was invited to do reports for Great Britain and the European continent also. He was also invited to join the General Education Board of the Rockefeller Foundation. In that position, he helped to oversee the remaining medical schools as well as the establishment of new ones. The General Education Board provided millions of dollars to doctors and scientists in order to get them on board with the allopathic model. While Abraham Flexner was doing his tours and reports, his brother Simon Flexner, the director of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, was busy inventing airborne viruses. In New York City in 1907, around 2,500 children had been diagnosed with poliomyelitis, some of which included paralysis. Poliomyelitis means inflammation of the spinal cord's grey matter. Simon Flexner, along with his colleague Paul Lewis, claimed it was caused by an invisible virus. I've heard that one before. In a paper published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1909, they claimed to have isolated the virus by successfully passing it through several monkeys. They started by injecting diseased human spinal cord tissue of a young boy who had died into the brains of monkeys. After a monkey became ill, a suspension of its diseased spinal cord tissue was injected into the brains of other monkeys, who also became ill. It was claimed that the Rockefeller Institute doctors had proven the virus for the cause of poliomyelitis. The paper asserted that the infecting agent of the epidemic poliomyelitis belongs to the class of minute and filterable viruses that have not thus far been demonstrated with certainty under the microscope. This so-called virus that they were supposedly injecting into the monkeys' brains was hardly pure. It also contained an undetermined amount of contaminants, such as pureed spinal cord, brain, fetal matter, and ground up flies. The Rockefeller Institute was allowed to create virology as a separate field, independent from bacteriology, during the 1920s. Soon, virus researchers at the Rockefeller Institute claimed to have discovered the viruses that cause smallpox, mumps, measles, and yellow fever. Then, preventative vaccines were announced for pneumonia and yellow fever. So why was a successful oil tycoon so interested in the medical system in the first place? Even though John D. Rockefeller had become very wealthy from his oil monopoly, there were investigations and threats of breaking his organization apart, which was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court on May 5, 1911, a year after the Flexner report was published. Thus, Rockefeller needed another avenue to make money off his product. he came across the idea of utilizing coal tar to create products that affect the human body. Scientists in the early 1900s were discovering that they could create many chemicals from the oil, and these could be used to create pharmaceutical products. Also, compounds made from petrochemicals could be patented, thus creating a very profitable market. Another motivating factor for this takeover of the modern medical system by John D. Rockefeller was the influence of his father, William Avery Rockefeller, who was a travelling snake oil salesman. His father would pretend to be deaf and blind while he peddled his miracle drugs. He was known by the moniker Devil Bill and lived under assumed names. In 1855 he secretly married another woman, Margaret Allen, splitting his time between two families. She was married to him for 50 years and did not realize the marriage was bigamous and not legal until after his death. Before his death, he was known as an eye and ear specialist named Dr. William Livingston. One of his associates recalled that he had a big jug of medicine and he treated all diseases from the same jug. The supposed doctor would laugh about his concoction magically being able to cure anyone willing to give him money. He had no qualms about cheating others in the name of profit. It is very clear that the apple did not fall far from the tree. By the 1920s, Rockefeller controlled the oil, chemical and medical industries. He had taken the con that his father was selling to small crowds and perpetuated it on a massive scale. John D. Rockefeller was the greatest snake oil salesman of them all. Rockefeller partnered with German pharmaceutical giant IG Farben, known as Bayer today, in order to control pharmaceutical interests in the West. The pharmaceutical industry has steadily netted increasing profits to become the world's second largest manufacturing industry after the arms industry. During the 1930s in America, there was economic depression and then war, but very few new outbreaks of poliomyelitis were noted. In 1938, presumed polio victim Franklin D. Roosevelt supported the formation of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, nicknamed the March of Dimes, to collect tax-exempt donations to fund Jonas Salk's polio vaccine research.
But soon, perhaps within a year, there may be a vaccine available to all that may be the answer.
You see, there's so much hope now, because this year we may have a vaccine that will stop crippling polio.
Help your National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis to store up supplies of the Dr. Salk polio vaccine.
Yes, but to fight polio this year will take a lot of money. $64 million.
$64 million? Wow.
Send your dimes and dollars to your local March of Dimes headquarters, and send your mercy dollars and dimes to your local March of Dimes headquarters.
Send your contributions to your local March of Dime headquarters today.
Send your dimes and your dollars into the nearest March of Dimes headquarters.
Send your dimes and dollars to your local March of Dimes headquarters.
Give every dime and dollar that you can spare to the 1954 March of Dimes.
And that's what every good American should do. Join the March of Dimes.
During World War II, the Rockefeller Foundation helped test DDT in the United States, North Africa and Italy. It was used by the US Army to control bedbugs, lice and mosquitoes. At the end of World War II, in October 1945, DDT was authorized by the US government for civilian use as a pesticide against flies and mosquitoes. The US Department of Agriculture advised farmers to wash their dairy cows with a solution of DDT, and cornfields and fruit orchards were also sprayed with DDT. As the use of DDT increased, so did the number of cases of poliomyelitis. Listed polio cases went from 25,000 in 1943 to over 280,000 cases in 1952. Every summer, more and more children across America were diagnosed with it, based on symptoms such as pain, fever, upset stomach, and diarrhea. The public were told that poliomyelitis was not spread by toxic chemicals, but by flies and mosquitoes, and DDT can save your family from polio by killing the flies and mosquitoes. The toxic effects of DDT were such that it could not be washed off plants and vegetables. Between 1945 and 1952, the Rockefeller Foundation experimented with DDT in Mexico, killing mosquitoes as part of its anti-malaria program. This is despite the fact that malaria abounds where mosquitoes are entirely or almost entirely absent, as in the tropical highlands and the elevated regions of Rhodesia. By having poliomyelitis, also known as polio or infantile paralysis, as a disease spread by a mythical virus, the Rockefeller Institute and the AMA were able to cut off any serious research into alternate explanations, such as exposure to chemical pesticides and toxins, to explain the seasonal outbreaks. In fact, the public health laws only allowed investigations into contagion. In 1951, Dr. Ralph Scobie, a critic of the Rockefeller polio contagion theory, noted that children affected with the disease were kept in general hospital wards, and not a single one of the other inmates of the wards of the hospital was affected with the disease. In the early 1950s, increasing attention was given in the US Congress and amongst farmers as to the possible dangers of heavy pesticide use, not only with DDT, but also the even more toxic BHC, benzene hexachloride. Dr. Morton Biskind testified to the US House of Representatives in 1951 on the possible link of paralytic polio to toxins such as DDT and BHC. He noted that at the time DDT was released for public use, it was known to be extremely toxic to animals, and that it was stored in the body fat and appeared in the milk, and that a few human cases of DDT poisoning had been noted, but these observations had been completely ignored. He testified to Congress that shortly after the last war, a large number of cases had been observed by physicians all over the country in which a group of symptoms occurred, the most prominent feature of which was gastroenteritis, persistently recurrent nervous symptoms, and extreme muscular weakness. He described several case examples of patients whose severe symptoms, including paralysis, disappeared when exposure to DDT and related toxins was eliminated, and that his observations confirmed the view that DDT is responsible for a great deal of otherwise inexplicable human disability. Also noted was that most polio cases were in the summer months when DDT spraying was at its maximum. Dr. Fred Klenner had the idea to use large doses of intravenous ascorbic acid, vitamin C, on the hypothesis that his patients were victims of toxin poisoning and that vitamin C was a powerful detox. Klenner had success within days, treating more than 200 patients in the summer epidemics of 1949 to 1951. From 1951 to 1952, polio cases began to decline. The year before, the US Department of Agriculture advised farmers whose dairy cows were suffering severe effects from the use of DDT to reduce its use. There was also rising public concerns over the safety of DDT that led to a decline in DDT use, mainly from the publicized US Senate hearings on DDT and polio in 1951. By 1955, polio cases had fell by 2/3. In April 1955, the Rockefeller-developed Salk vaccine was announced to be safe and effective and ready for public use. A nationwide inoculation campaign followed late 1955 and early 1956, after polio had already declined, but of course the vaccine was given credit for it, and deaths and paralysis from the vaccine were swept under the corporate carpet. To reduce cases even further, the definition of polio was changed. Conditions that would have previously been classified as polio were now reclassified as other conditions, such as acute flaccid paralysis, chronic fatigue syndrome, encephalitis, meningitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and multiple sclerosis. By the way, if anyone is still deluded enough to think that the Rockefeller medical cabal wants public good health, remember, this is the same organization that financed the Nazi eugenics program, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, in the 1930s, and also financed the American Eugenics Society. Thank you for watching.